in the previous story, you mentioned about Carney going to Europe again. Again, I keep bringing that up because I think that Europe is not going to be able to save us. And this story will kind of tell you why. And I am very like, I respect European people a lot. I think they're very smart and they're, hardworking people. But the government of all these European countries are just absolute trash, and they're letting down the people of their great countries because you'll see what I mean in a second, right? So um, this was a post that was uploaded by the president of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, who said that Europe has all it needs to take the lead in this competitive race. This month, the European Commission will unveil the European Savings and Investment Union, will turn private savings into much needed investment. Now, that is the real kicker of that post, the real sentence that rubbed a lot of people the wrong way and stroke fear into a lot of people because what does she mean by turning private savings into much needed investment? So it sounds like she wants to unlock the savings that people have in bank accounts. If you add them all up, apparently it's up to 10 trillion euros. So that's a lot. If you just you take all the savings that everybody has in all of Europe, including retail investors, even companies and hedge funds and investment firms and whatnot. You just take all the cash that's apparently $10 trillion. This is concerning because, well, how are they going to unlock $10 trillion of savings, right? And why are they doing this in the first place? So the reason why they're doing this is because Europe is realizing that the Ukraine war has not really gone the way that they had hoped, right? Like Russia didn't collapse, and now they've poured hundreds of billions of dollars into this conflict already, and if they're determined to support Ukraine, which is nice, but that's going to cost a lot more money, and Europe is kind of afraid of Trump pulling out of NATO, which that has been suggested by a lot of not a lot, but by a few Republican people, including Elon Musk. I think actually has voiced some interest in pulling the U.S. out of NATO. And if that happens, Europe is really going to panic, right? So they're trying to ramp up their defense spending, and they realize that they can't do that if they're broke, right? So they need to find money somehow, and the Germany, which just had an election, and the new CDU government wanted to pass this huge budget that is, going to boost defense spending. And then as soon as that was unveiled, the German 10-year bond yields rocketed, right? And by bond yields rocketing, yields are inversely correlated to the price, meaning that the price of the bonds fell because nobody wants to lend Germany money because everyone's realizing how Germany is way overspending and they're just losing trust in the German government. So that's why they want more return investors. I'm talking about people who are in the market for bonds. The investors want more returns for the 10-year bond, and that's why the bond yields rocketed, right? So that's really not a good thing, even though people see green and it's like green is good. Green is not good when it comes to your bond yields if you're the country, right? So the 10-year German bond yields have rocketed, and the German Green Party actually is the only one that's surprisingly standing in between this budget passing, and they're vowing to block it. But they're only vowing to block it because they're complaining that there's not enough climate action initiatives. So the reason why they're blocking it is because they actually want to spend more money, and they're complaining that it's all like defense and war stuff, which is great. They don't have a problem with that, but they also want climate action stuff. and it's just a whole mess. Like the German government's like this election, pretty much, in my opinion. Again, I'm not German. I don't live in Germany. I've never even been to Germany, so maybe I'm talking out of line here, and I don't know what I'm talking about. But from everything I'm seeing, the German government's an absolute mess, and it was an absolute mess before the election. And this election basically didn't solve anything because they're still kind of stuck where they're trying to spend billions and billions of euros, and uh, they're only getting like that budget is only getting blocked because the Green Party wants to spend even more billions of euros. So this whole like deal with Europe, this is what I'm afraid of, right? Like it's clear that Europe, I think, is in decline, and I'm sure Sunil, you will speak a lot about that later as well. But what I'm afraid of is that this is going to lead Europe down the path of authoritarianism and control. And what I mean by that is that I'm not just like fear mongering, right? Because the European Union has actually published plans to launch a central bank digital currency, a CBDC, by October of this year. So not like October of 10 years later, but just later this year, they're gonna start the pilot rollout of the CBDC. And in case you guys don't know what a CBDC is, it's as the name suggests, a digital currency that is directly issued by the central bank. And why is it bad? Well, let me just go through some of the reasons why it might be not the thing that you really want to hope to have in your country. Because with the CBDC, what the government could do is do negative interest rates. So you know how if you put your money in a bank, you get paid interest, and maybe it's not a lot of interest, but you do get paid some money for leaving your money at a bank. Well, imagine if that rate was negative, meaning that it costed you to leave your own money in a bank, and they charge you a fee, a negative interest rate for leaving your money in the bank. And you say, why would I leave my money in the bank if they're going to charge me money just to leave it at the bank? I'll just withdraw it all, stuff it under my mattress, right? Well, with a CBDC, you can't do that because it's all digital. How are you going to withdraw it? You can't. So that's a problem. So right now, if they try to do a if they try to do a negative interest rates without a CBDC, then everyone would just rush to the bank and withdraw it, right? But with a CBDC, you can't do that anymore. They could also, for example, I'm not saying that 100% that they'll do all of these things, by the way, but I'm just saying with the CBDC is always a possibility. And with the government, what is a possibility today that they promise that they won't do might just be reality a couple of years later, right? So just think about the income tax, for example. When the income tax was first introduced, the government said it was going to be it'll only be affect a small amount of people, a small amount of top income earners, and it'll maybe even be temporary. Maybe we'll just like do it for a couple of years and then get rid of it, and then it applies to everybody after only a few years, right? So with the dangers of the CBDC, I talked about negative interest rates. Another danger is expiry dates on your money. So imagine every time you get paid, you have 3 months to spend it, or else it just vanishes, right? And by the way, you can't withdraw it, remember, because cash doesn't exist anymore. Because if a CBDC replaces cash, then there's nothing you could do, right? Because it's all digital. So they could put an expiry date on your money. And the reason why they would want to do that is to get you to spend the money so that you can stimulate the economy, right? Remember, they need to unlock private savings, right? How are they going to unlock private savings? By making private savings impractical or just like impossible even, right? And imagine that you're caught speeding, your speeding ticket, the fine, gets directly taken out of your wallet, right? Because they have control over your wallet, right? Because it's a digital currency that's issued by the central bank, and your wallet, which is digital, it has a direct connection to the central bank. So they'll just take the fine out of your account, and then you can appeal, and then it'll take 3 months, and then they'll probably deny you in the end, anyways, right? Like how Europeans know how bureaucratic the European Union is, so you can imagine how that would work, right? They could also bar you from buying certain amounts or certain things. So, for example, you have 100 euros per month to spend on meat because there's a push for people to stop eating meat these days. So maybe for climate reasons, right? The government's going to say eating meat is bad for the climate. You get 100 euros to spend per month to on meat and anything labeled meat products. And then if you overspend your quota, then if you hit that limit, then you can't buy any more meat, even if you have the money. So they could impose categories that are banned or quoted, so that you're limited to how much you can buy. And then you're gonna have to buy like fried grasshoppers instead of meat, right? So this is another agenda item of the WEF. Again, people call me fear mongering. I'm not fear mongering, right? This is actually legit stuff that the WEF, World Economic Forum, which is a lot of the same people that run the European Union, this is exactly what the kind of stuff that they're pushing, right? For people to eat less meat for the sake of the climate, and to replace meat with, eating insects as a food source, right? So again, I'm not making this up. And yeah, basically, there's also like privacy concerns, right? The digital euro, they're going to be able to track every payment. They can block purchases. Again, automatic taxes as well as automatic fines, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, they're going to sell you this as a convenient way to pay for things. And granted, it is probably actually going to be more convenient than using cash. But yeah, like people who are not watching the issue closely, like us, they're probably not going to see the bad effects until it's too late, right? Like they're going to be like, oh, this digital thing is great. I don't have loose change everywhere, but then you're sacrificing a lot, right? Like again, you're sacrificing your privacy, and they could put all these like authoritarian controls like negative interest rates, expiry dates. All this stuff is would become possible with a fully digital central bank digital currency. So this is kind of the road that Europe is headed down, and I don't like the precedent that they're setting, yeah, for the future. And yeah, I don't know if this is actually going to become a thing, or if Europeans are going to, realize and wake up and push back. But yeah, I mean, toss the question to you, actually, Sunil. Like, what do you think is kind of the cause of Europe's decline, if it is in decline? And what do you think about the CBDC thing that I mentioned earlier?
Yeah, I mean the news, the this is definitely indicative of Europe's decline. Europe has like a weird relationship with the United States that started like after World War II, right? I'm sure a lot of people who like are watching this know the story, but the United States like helped rebuild Europe. The United States helped liberate parts of Europe. And ever since then, Europe's kind of been like a pet project of American elites to like try to encourage them to get along, have like a market of like allies across the Atlantic. And America's always had like agendas to like keep Europe, has always had this agenda of like kind of keeping Europe as friend and making sure all the European countries don't go to war anymore. And basically, America's got this weird military relationship where they've essentially subsidized Europe's security in perpetuity. And they've subsidized our security in Canada too. But Europe's in a very specific situation because NATO started as a pact to push back against like Russian aggression or Soviet aggression at the time. And now it's kind of aimless. It doesn't really have a proper use case or a well-defined use case, but it's about Europe's security. But it's been like 70 years where America has subsidized Europe's security to the point where like the first attempt at Europe needing to like rearm itself and to become like become competent in defending itself, they're like they're in need. I mean, first of all, Europe's not in a good financial position, so it's not a good starting place. And the first thing they do is this like turn private savings into investment, which tells me that it's some kind of debasement policy, or somehow they're going to force more savings into bonds and find a way to use that to leverage Europe's, I guess, war debt that they're anticipating that they're going to have to take on. So it's just like a odd situation to see Europe scrambling like this. I do believe, I do agree with a lot of what you have to say about Europe moving towards kind of, I guess you were kind of describing like a dystopian outcome. I'm not coming out and saying Europe's going to become a dystopia, but like they're certainly into that WEF, like paternalistic government, centralization of government type mentality. You're seeing them take a dive into the CBDC. I like see the CBDC as like the government shitcoin cycle, because now, like, there was a point in time where everybody had a coin. Everybody had a coin for certain use cases. Everybody, or there was, this is Bitcoin. This is a new Bitcoin, but better than Bitcoin, or this is a coin that's specifically for this use case. And now governments are getting into it, and now it's like we're going to recreate the euro, but it's a digital form euro. And then of course, it's the same thing as the euro. It's not like it's fixed supply like Bitcoin. It's not like it's going to protect their citizens from inflation, but then it gives the governments all these new powers that they promised to never use. And then inevitably there's going to be a moment where they find a reason to use it, or they find a crisis to use it. So it's definitely not a good trend for Europe. I mean, I feel like I have a little bit of hope that like Europe is just going to kind of like, as it continues to go into decline, eventually their citizens will wake up and stop electing governments that support these kinds of policies. I have a hard time but yeah, like it doesn't, like Europe is trying to like act performatively, and we're strong and we're gonna protect Ukraine. I think like but then like there's always like a part of it that's like weird. Like last week they came up with a plan that was an alternative to Trump's uh resource deal plan. And in the plan, Europe wrote up all these responsibilities that give to other countries like peacekeepers and stuff. And they gave the sole responsibility of the United States was to pay for the entire plan, to like finance the entire thing. Which, like, from the perspective of like MAGA and a lot of the people who are voting for Trump, like that's a lot of entitlement that Europe has. Like Europe is very entitled to United States money. And I think that a part of that is how Europe has been conditioned over the last 50, 60 years, because the United States has like again and again bailed out Europe, whether it's militarily or financially. And I don't mean this to like piss off European viewers. And like what happened in World War II was, it was a worthy war, and I'm glad Canada was involved in the liberation of Europe against Hitler. And I think that I do support our relationship with Europe overall, but it was from a Canadian perspective. I can't speak for the Americans, but I sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought, but I just it's very odd how, from a MAGA perspective, from like a Trump supporter's perspective, it would be really weird reading a newspaper, and it would be really weird reading about this news story and seeing how entitled Europe feels to American markets, but also also like American money to finance their protection. So I guess the main thing is that like this isn't sustainable the way that Europe and America's relationship has been. It may have served American interests at a certain point in time, but that's clearly coming to an end. And yeah, and I do agree with you that it is kind of concerning to see where Europe's heading, like moving away from free speech but they're not moving away from democracy, but they're definitely like weakening their local democracies in favor of the European Union government, which isn't necessarily a democracy. It's not really elected in the same manner. So yeah, we're moving towards centralization, away from towards censorship, and towards a central bank digital currency, and towards policy, just towards like open policies and debasing European savers. Not and the savers aren't being debased by their national governments. They're being debased by the European central government, which is even more, kind of feels dystopian to me.
Yeah, and I would say that they are moving away from democracy, and that's actually not a hyperbole to say that, because they're clearly moving away. A lot of what I've seen in countries like Germany and the UK. The UK left the European Union, but they can't leave the continent, right? They're still part of Europe from a geographic perspective. Uh, what I've seen out of the UK, out of Germany, are a lot of these like super weird stories of how people get in trouble for posting racist memes. And I'm not encouraging people to post racist memes, and you should not post racist memes. But at the same time, just being racist alone is protected under free speech, because it is like it's not illegal to be racist if you're just saying stuff. You might not be a nice person if you say that kind of stuff, but it is part of free speech as well to have differing opinions, right? And a lot of it, it's like, what is considered racist, right? It's like some people think that this thing is racist, and then another group disagrees, and there's debate as to like what actually, like if you post a meme that's slightly offensive, like how offensive does it have to be to be like considered racist, quote unquote, right? So it's just I've seen a lot of this stuff where the government is like trying to crack down on these racist memes in favor of like in the goal of fighting hate speech. And I just think that they're going a little bit too far, and they're encroaching on people's rights. But Sunil, you wanted to add something?
Well, I was going to add to that. The point you were just making is that the government is weaponizing like important topics like racism and like sympathetic topics like racism. So they're weaponizing the sympathy around it, and then they're using that to find a way to institute controls. So it's definitely concerning. It's I don't even know if they're often doing it. I feel like they're doing it and they mean well. Like they don't even realize what they're doing half the time. Like even this policy, like it tells you a lot about what happened. Like how when a policy starts to get implemented through these big bureaucracy, how immovable they are. Like they just have to keep going forward with like their Ukraine policy, and they're going to have to keep going forward with their like debasement policy. So sorry, I lost my train of thought for a second, but my point I was going to add was that like in terms of, sorry, what were you talking about? I lost my train of thought.
No, I was just talking about like the UK and Germany cracking down on hate speech, and how that is an example of the erosion of democracy, right? Because the freedom of speech and freedom of religion too, right? I see a lot of the like Western European governments. They've welcomed a lot of refugees from the Middle East, and who are predominantly Muslim, and then Islam is kind of elevated to like a higher status almost, because like you don't want to say anything bad about Islam because then you get labeled as a bigot and a racist. But then you can say whatever you want against Christianity, and it's okay. So like there's if like a bomb goes off in front of a mosque, then that's a hate crime. But then if somebody sets fire to a church or blows up a church, then it's just a regular crime, and they don't call it a hate crime or stuff like that. I've seen a lot of stories where there's like this weird dichotomy where you can make fun of Christianity all you want, which is a dominant religion in most Western European countries, right? You can make fun of Christianity all you want, but Islam, that's off limits. You can't do it.
Yeah, I think these are well intentioned. I think we've talked about some of this stuff before, but where we say like these are well intentioned policies, but then they end up becoming illiberal. So they're like I remember what I was going to say is that they're weaponizing sympathy, and they end up implementing illiberal policies, which are well intentioned. But if you make the society more illiberal, you're arguably hurting democracy, like the point you just made. So yeah, Europe is becoming a lot more illiberal. I find the same thing with Canada under Justin Trudeau. I found it became a lot more illiberal. So I guess that's the main thing is that Europe might like keep some like a shell of their democratic institutions going forward, but like there's an illiberalism that's seeping into this system. A lot of it has to do with the EU, and it has to do with the central government of the EU having so much power over the actual domestic governments, but definitely in a illiberal path. Absolutely, it feels very dystopian Maybe it's just being on Bitcoin Twitter makes it feel dystopian though, because we're influenced definitely by this topic based on our own basically political Bitcoin beliefs. So
Yeah, I mean, obviously everyone has their bias, right? I try to look at things from different angles, but the way that, uh, at least what I've seen coming out of Europe, I'm not quite a big fan of, let's just say, right? And uh, it's funny that you brought up Justin Trudeau and the illiberalism that's kind of seeped into Canada as well. It's ironic that Justin Trudeau's party is called the Liberal Party, and yet a lot of, as you said, illiberalism has seeped into Canadian society as well, right? Where I'm not sure if you've heard of the what's called the immigration consensus in Canada, where it's like this concept that immigration has always been a consensus topic in Canada, that Canada is a nation that welcomes immigrants from no matter where you are in the world. And that is still kind of the overarching theme of Canada, even to this day. However, there's a larger and larger movement and differing opinion on the issue of immigration in Canada, and it's kind of sad that we've slightly lost the consensus where because of the immigration policies of the Liberal government under Trudeau, uh, Canada, I think if you just ask anyone who's either born in Canada or have lived in Canada for the past 10 years or longer before Trudeau came into office, they would probably tell you that, like, hey, we're a welcoming nation, but we've let in too many people and we haven't been really selective enough because a lot of people are let in under refugee status or international students who can't really contribute to society right away. And I don't want to make this sound like we're letting in like less valuable people or anything like that, but it's just like, face it, right? Because we have a skilled workers shortage in Canada. We have all these like engineer shortage, doctor shortage, shortage in like dentists and higher skilled workers. And I don't want to make it sound like some people are more valuable than others, but I'm just saying, like, there's a certain group of skills that we need that we haven't really been selecting the people that we're letting into this country from, that, like, from the skill sets that we need to let those people in, right? And we've just kind of opened the floodgates, and we've just let in too many people. And it's not even about like anyone's race or anything like that. It's just, if you let in people, no matter where they're from, they're going to need housing, they're going to need food, they're going to need resources. And if you let in too many people at once, then we don't have enough resources. And that sucks for the people who are native to Canada too. So it's just we've lost the immigration consensus because of the way that the Trudeau administration has handled this immigration, um, you know, issue. And I feel like it's even worse in a lot of European countries. And I am seeing, like, stuff that's happening in Germany, where Germany has let in a lot of people, especially from the Middle East, as I said, and then that does cause a lot of disruption in society, because even if they're nice people, again, you have to feed them, you have to house them, and the government has to spend a lot of money, and that means less resources to go around for everybody else. And I just see kind of Germany as a microcosm of what would have happened if the Democrats in the States have been reelected. Because I see the CDU, which is the party that's recently been reelected, as just pretty much ideologically identical to the American Democrats. And what's going to happen in Germany, I think you'll see it, what's going to happen in Germany is going to be what would have happened in America if the Democrats have been reelected, in my opinion. Now, maybe you disagree with that opinion, but that's up to you. That's just kind of how I think about things. But yeah, Sunil, what do you think about anything I just said?
yeah, also, the most recent thing you said, oh yeah, I mean, in terms, I think that like Europe is going to engage and like is going to commit and engage in modern monetary policy, which basically the whole world was engaged in, starting with the COVID situation when we printed all that money and we started to take on huge amounts of debt to pay for the COVID relief efforts, and that kind of started an economic trend called MMT, modern monetary policy, which was implemented everywhere. And it seems like America is moving away from that now under Trump. They're taking a new direction. They're trying to rebase the dollar with Bitcoin. They're trying to lower debt. They're trying to like gut certain types of government programs that they find wasteful. So they're going into austerity. They're moving away from MMT, which is like modern Keynesianism. And I think Europe's going to keep going with MMT, and we're actually going to see these two approaches uh, work parallel to each other, and we're going to be able to see the impact. And the impact that you're seeing already, and America's bond market isn't always comparable to the rest of the world, but you're seeing Europe announcing big, giant spending programs. Their bond yields are going like this, and America is talking about the opposite, and their bond yields are coming down. They're not coming down like as quickly as the German yields are going up, but they're definitely coming down faster than most people would have expected. So that I think that's interesting. I think that your example about mass immigration in Canada, mass immigration in Europe, is an example of an illiberal policy. I feel like we were kind of tricked as a populace how these things were implemented, and that's why the people have kind of like lost trust in their governments. And I think that that's an example of an illiberal policy that got implemented in many Western countries, and I think that a lot of that happened because of influential organizations like the World Economic Forum, these large extra governmental organizations that seems to have a huge amount of influence over the decisions of our politicians. And to the point where every country is implementing the same policies that the people are like basically rioting against.
Yeah, and I was watching was it like Joe Rogan or something? And he was saying how the term NGO, non-government organization, is the biggest lie that anyone could ever say. Because like a lot of these NGOs, they call themselves non-governmental organizations, but they're the most connected, well connected to like every government in the world that you can imagine, and they're deeply in the pockets of like the people who run these NGOs are like either current or former politicians or
their kids or their wives or
or
whatever.
their family,
Yeah.
like people who are
Yeah.
deeply connected to politicians, right? So
It's a circular economy. Like the money starts with the taxpayer. Like it starts with the government funds an NGO because they're funding an initiative, and the money just keeps flowing. And it is absolutely a form of corruption. It's just like a form of corruption that's totally illegal because we've like used like the legislature to allow it to happen.
Yeah, and what we've seen with Doge cutting USAID was maybe the first time that I've ever seen anyone go after this like problem with the NGOs and the circular kind of circle of corruption between governments and people who are secretly government but claim not to be.
Well, it feels like a bubble too. Like it feels like it's only upheld as long as governments constantly trickle in money, and it feels like this whole industry is a bubble. Like it feels like it hurts our economies, like the vibrancy of our economies in the West, because we don't have any skilled labor anymore. We only have experts who work in this NGO sector. I mean, that's a huge part of our workforce.